Hey guys, I'm Reagan Kathryn, and today I'm going to show you guys how I made Etain from Mabinogi. So Etain is the newest protagonist in Mabinogi's G25 Hypernova storyline, and I don't really want to spoil the entire storyline for you, so you're just going to have to play the game to find out more for yourself. Play the game. Do it. Add me. Now server. My name's Familia, 2 L's. Okay, but let's jump into how I made this Etain cosplay because it is pretty complex. So, like I said, Etain is really complex, and I tried my best to break this video down into a few different sections. So the very first thing I started with was her side tabards. So I started off by drawing the tabard on paper. This way I could make sure it looked exactly how I wanted it to before the next step, which is cutting out the pattern out of paper. To get the gold leaf design on it, I used this product called Wonder Under, and it's literally my favorite thing in the entire world. So you just place the Wonder Under face down on the back of your fabric, iron it on, and then you're good. After that, you can trace your design onto the paper portion of the Wonder Under, and then you really carefully cut around your design. This part always takes me the longest because I'm not that great at cutting things out. But after you're done, you just peel the paper backing off the portion you cut out, and this gives you your design with an iron-on backing. That way you can iron the design onto your final fabric. Since I'm using spandex, the Wonder Under will only hold long enough for you to top stitch the design down. I like setting my sewing machine to the slowest setting so I can make sure to stitch as close to the edge as possible. But once you finish stitching it, you should have a really pretty applique. After I finished the tabard, I moved on to the most technical part of this costume, which is her skirt. I stared at this skirt part for days, and I wish I was kidding. It even haunted me in my sleep. But I finally decided to go with an A-line skirt, which is still loose, but it's not as curved as a circle skirt would be, so that was going to make the math that comes with the design later much easier. To start off with the skirt, I started with the white design that runs horizontally on it. So I designed the pattern on my computer and then had my Cricut cut it out. And my dog Obi was really not happy with the Cricut. There was a bunch of barking, but we finally got it all out. You don't like? Once the vinyl was all cut out, I had to weed it. And this means that I needed to take a special tool and remove all of the vinyl that wasn't going to be transferred onto the skirt. This was definitely the most time-consuming portion of the entire costume. It took me around 6 hours for me to weed over 30 pieces of vinyl. Half the time that I was ironing the vinyl, I was actually playing Mabinogi and doing Sidhi, so maybe that contributed. No. To create the actual pattern for the skirt, I created a few different mock-ups to make sure that I really liked how it was laying before I cut it out of my good spandex. And the hard part was I didn't want it to be too curved because then I would have to curve the horizontal pattern on her skirt, and that involves a ton of math. But I didn't want it to be too straight because Etain's skirt is pretty flowy still. So once I finally got my pattern down, I cut it out of my good fabric, and next it was time to dye it. I decided that the best way to achieve the really pretty gradient on Etain's skirt was to dip dye it. So I started by boiling a ton of water, then I mixed some blue and black dye to get the correct color for her skirt. And after that, I was pretty much just trying not to scald my hands. To make sure the skirt has the gradient, you dunk it once to the very top of where you want the colored portion to end. And then you just continue dipping it, keeping the darker parts in the dye for a longer period of time. After, you just have to rinse out the excess dye and then leave it to dry. Once the skirt finished drying, I laid it all out. Carefully placed the vinyl in the places I wanted the pattern to go, and then ironed it all down. This is how I achieved the pattern that she has on her skirt in real life. To create the gloves and shoes, I hand sewed a bias tape to a pair of white gloves I had already made. And then I super glued the same bias to a different pair of shoes. Next, I just hand sewed the little emblem onto each. After I finished the skirt, I went on to the bodice and the sleeves. This was much easier by comparison. I used a pattern I had from a different costume for the bodice and sleeves, and the same method I used for the tabard of Wonder Under for the sleeve design. Then, I used barge to glue down the gold foam pieces on her shoulder and neckline. Next, I just needed to add the gold bias to the bodice, and it was done! This brings me to the next portion of the costume, all of the foam pieces. I did the foam in two different ways. The first was I made patterns myself on stream and cut them out by hand. And the second was my good friend Pineapple Props used his laser cutter to get some really precise foam cuts for the more intricate foam designs. We also used some 3D printing to get the more dynamic parts of her staff created. Seriously, couldn't have done this without Pineapple Props' help 3D modeling and printing everything. Next, all I had to do was Dremel the foam to make it smooth, then Plastidip all the individual pieces before I got to painting. I like to put a base color of spray paint on and then go back and paint all the individual colors by hand. After everything was finished painting, all I needed to do was add snaps and other attachments. Finally, the last part to be completed was the wig. Etain has his blue hair that ombres into white, which provided quite the challenge, as you can't dye a wig lighter. So I found a ponytail wig online that had the correct ombre and then cut it into wefts. This is where my friend Linux Knight helped me. While I was working on sewing, she hand sewed every single weft into a full wig. This made it possible to achieve the full ombre effect. We also spent a ton of time on the headpiece, since that was going to be a huge focal point of the costume. Linux helped by patterning the hat portion, and then we glued all of the foam pieces and hand sewed the veil onto the headband, giving us our super intricate headpiece. And after the headpiece, the only thing left to do was put the entire costume on. That everyone can see how much love, time, energy, and some blood sacrifices that I put into this costume. I'm so excited with how she turned out. This was definitely one of the more challenging costumes that I've ever made in my life, but probably one of the most rewarding ones too. I really got to use all of my skills, from wig cutting to foam crafting to sewing to dyeing things. I touched on almost all of them, and I'm so happy with how she turned out. So if anyone needs me, I will definitely be on Mabinogi playing the generation and getting the most out of it. Also, a really huge thank you to everyone from the community who let me bombard them with talk about this costume, especially Gramps, who I think is probably more excited than I am that I'm done. And another big thank you to Brandon, our aka Meruleaf, for staying up with me and editing this video. I really hope that you guys like this costume and video as much as I do. And that's how I made Etain. I know that this was really complex, so if you guys have any questions at all, make sure to leave them in the comments below and I'll be sure to answer. Also, I wanted to give a huge thank you to Mabinogi for sponsoring this costume, so make sure you check out G25 Hypernova in Mabinogi. I can't wait to play with everyone. Thanks for watching!